Okay, so today's video is going to be a bit of a viewer submitted question. The reason I say it's a bit of a viewer submitted question is because they didn't exactly ask me this question, but they did bring up my name when they asked the question. I was listening to the Poorly Made Police Memes podcast the other day, which is something that I often do, and I would encourage everybody to do because it's honest to God, it's one of my favorite podcasts. I've been a guest many times. I'm going to be a guest coming up again soon. Unfortunately, I don't always have time to participate in the podcast, but I don't know, due to my frequent guest appearances, my name comes up from time to time. So on the most recent episode of the podcast I listened to, it's season 2, episode 45. The title is Am I the Asshole? And this was one where I haven't listened to the entire thing yet. I stopped after my name came up, but you'll have to listen to the whole podcast to see that part. But the part that we're going to go over today is a guy sent an email or a direct message into Lenny on the podcast saying, "Hey, I have a case law question that I would like your opinion on. You, Ben, and Saul, if they're available." And then he proceeds to ask this question. What I did was I'm just going to play the part of the podcast where they ask the question, and I put some images in there to kind of paint the picture for you, give you an understanding of the question that's being asked, and then once that is over, I will give you kind of my thoughts on it and my reaction, and hopefully everybody finds this to be somewhat interesting and educational. If not, you can tell me. It'll hurt my feelings. I'll probably cry. But I'll get over it. So anyway, without further ado, here is the question as it was stated in the podcast.
So I'll preface this by saying I work in a small town in blank, Wisconsin. Get it? And per city ordinance, all city parks close at 10 p.m. This is pretty common for us to find people in the park after hours, so we always stop them to see what they're doing. Technically, we don't write a citation for violation of park hours, but if drugs, alcohol, and other crimes come up during the stop. So the other night, I'm patrolling one of the larger parks at 10:40 and see a silver truck parked in the back of the parking lot with all the lights off. I pull up, throw on my takedowns and spotlight, and call it out to dispatch. I walk up to the truck to make contact and see no one inside. Check the park and no one is around. The plate comes back. Dispatch advises the truck comes back to a black Mercedes SUV. So I check the VIN, but it's covered up with a piece of paper. By the way, 10 times out of 10, if the VIN's covered by a piece of paper, it's a stolen car. Just my experience. Anyway, looking at the driver door, I noticed the lock appeared to be pushed in and broken. I look inside and see the ignition panel under the steering column is torn off with multiple wires hanging down. This leading me to believe the truck is stolen. Looking at the front end of the truck, it appears to have been in a crash. The windshield seems to be replaced, and the rear glass seems to be replaced as well. All the truck doors are locked. I crawl under the truck to attempt to find a VIN stamped on the frame, but cannot locate one. I advise dispatch of the plate and a vehicle don't match and ask them to contact the city of the registered owner of the plate to check for stolen vehicle reports. Dispatch comes back and says the other city has no reports, but the RO has a long drug history. I check the truck once more and I can't find anything else. I leave the park and speak to a deputy who thinks I could use my lockout kit to open the truck to get the VIN. He calls the sergeant, who agrees. I call my sergeant, and he feels it's a Fourth Amendment issue, even though I'm only looking to identify the truck and not search it. We all look up case law regarding the issue, but can't seem to find any that fits. I monitor the truck for a while, but end up having to leave. Just wondering what your thoughts are. Would we have been justified in opening the truck to make sure it wasn't stolen? Now,
So I just recorded my response to this, and it was like 12 minutes of me talking, and there was something I forgot to say. One thing about this question that I really like that's really brilliant, as far as letting you guys in the audience see, is that this stuff is it's very complicated and complex, and people will look at it all from different angles. And my favorite part about this was he calls one supervisor and the guy says it's okay. The other supervisor says it's not okay. These are things that as police officers, we all talk about, and we all have different levels of comfort as to how far we're willing to go with some things. Some people are extremely conservative and they'll say, you know what, if that even hints at something I don't like, I'm not going to do it. Other officers are going to say, you know what, I realize that this law, and this law is here, but I don't think that any of those apply to this current situation, so I think I'm good to go. You'll have varying supervisors that believe that. You'll have officers that all believe that way. You'll also have judges that disagree on things, and that's the reason we have the Supreme Court, because every case that's ever gone to the Supreme Court, not every single case depending on jurisdiction, but a lot of cases that have gone to the Supreme Court are because you had a lower court judge disagree with a higher court judge, or vice versa. And then even on the Supreme Court, we have a lot of 5-4 decisions. So this stuff there's a lot of nuance to it, and it's complicated. So I'm going to give you my take on it. You might disagree with my take on it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that one is right versus the other. It kind of depends on what judge you get at the end of the day. So I don't know. I wanted to add that in real quick. Enjoy my less, or maybe more rambling section of the video. I don't know. Have fun. Talk to you later. Alrighty. So the answer to that question, it's multifaceted answer, and there's a lot of things to consider here. The first part of it is this a Fourth Amendment issue? Like the second sergeant said, second supervisor. Well, yes, it's anytime you look at searching a vehicle, entering a vehicle to find the VIN number is a search, regardless of how you look at it. You're searching that vehicle for something. The Fourth Amendment applies to all search and seizure. This is something that we all know. Just because it is a Fourth Amendment issue doesn't mean that you'd be breaking the law by searching this vehicle. Does this fall under what you are allowed to do under the Fourth Amendment? I do believe that it does. I believe that you would be allowed under the Fourth Amendment to enter this vehicle and try to look for the VIN number. There's a variety of reasons for that. I would say that your intention is we'll get into intentions here in a little bit, but the first scenario, kind of as you stated it, your intention is to see if this vehicle is stolen. I would also add that you're probably going to want to tow this vehicle out of the park regardless of if it's stolen or not, because it doesn't belong there. It's in the middle of the night. The parks are closed. It's a sketchy vehicle. So you might run the VIN and everything and find that it has not been reported stolen. That doesn't mean it is not stolen. So you can still impound a vehicle for suspected of being stolen. You can impound a vehicle for being in a park when it doesn't belong in a park. It's just a parking violation. That's a very easy thing to do. There's reasons that there are, the court has named exceptions to the Fourth Amendment, or reasons that, you can search somebody when under normal grounds, the Fourth Amendment would protect that person or property from being searched, particularly when it comes to stolen cars. And I look at like seizing of stolen cars or towing stolen cars. One big exception that I can think about is entering private property. I've done it probably thousands of times in my career because I work in a big city. If I'm driving down an alley and I see a car up on blocks in somebody's backyard, I run the tag, or I go up and I get the VIN and I run that VIN and it comes back as a stolen vehicle, I'm going to go ahead and tow that car. I might do an investigation where I go knock on the door. I might talk to the neighbors. I might do all that stuff. But fundamentally what I'm doing is I'm entering private property. That private property is protected under the Fourth Amendment from agents of the government, just like me. But the problem is there's a stolen vehicle on that property in clear view. So I'm entering that property, which is generally protected against, under the Fourth Amendment, but this is an exception to that rule. It's a stolen vehicle. So I'm going to enter that property and take the vehicle. I think that this would fall under that same type of scenario. Every indication points to this being a stolen vehicle. I think that you'd be within your authority to go ahead and gain entry to that vehicle, particularly if you're not causing damage to that vehicle. Now, I wouldn't be breaking a window in order to get in and look at that VIN, because another thing that I'm trying to figure out the order to cover all these things. Well, let's go down this road. When when you ran the tag and you had the officers in the next town over, or wherever this vehicle came from, go and check with the registered owner. They said, there's no reports of a stolen vehicle from that guy, but we will tell you he has a history of drug abuse. I have a lot of experience with people driving cars that have previously been stolen, and those people are heavy drug users or have a long history of drug offenses. Something that is incredibly likely to have occurred is that this guy used to drive a black Mercedes. It's not like the one I put in the picture in the video. It was probably some old beat up piece of crap Mercedes. He needed new brakes on it, and he couldn't afford to get new brakes on a Mercedes because it would have cost him $48,000 plus labor. So he traded that vehicle in to one of his buddies that he buys drugs from, and they gave him this truck. The truck was a piece of garbage. It had previously been stolen. The doors and everything are all punched on it, but he was able to get this truck for $300-400. So he takes his license plates off of his piece of crap Mercedes that he's no longer able to drive, puts it on this beater truck, has to get into the truck with the coat hanger, has to start the car with a screwdriver because he doesn't have any keys for it, but the truck does belong to him. It is his property, and if I was acting in good faith and I was able to enter that truck without causing any damage to run the VIN to determine whether or not it was stolen, I think I'd be covered. Now, if I busted the window to try to get in, I don't think I would be covered. So there's limitations as to how you're going to handle getting into this car. Now, the other thing that I want to ask is, why do you really want to get in this car? Where I work, I can tow a vehicle for suspected stolen. I am pretty sure I've done it before, where I've put suspected stolen on the impound slip, and I've put the license plate that's on the vehicle. I'll put license plate does not match. Under VIN, I'll put unable to read VIN, something like that. And I'll put my best guess as to what the vehicle was. And then I'll impound the car that way. It's completely locked up. I'll make sure I get a rollback. The vehicle goes. It is what it is. A lot of people will try to get into a vehicle because they think that there's further evidence of crime in that vehicle. There might be a gun in that vehicle. There might be a dead body under the seat. There might be drugs, contraband, stuff like that. If that is your goal for getting into the vehicle and you want to use the premise of, well, I was just getting in because I wanted to see the VIN. If you get into that vehicle, there's a couple of problems there. Firstly, you do get into the vehicle and you find a bunch of drugs. Now, the dead body is a little bit extreme because that would lead to an intense investigation. But let's just say you find some drugs, maybe even a firearm. Who are you going to charge with possession of those criminal instruments? There's nobody to charge. You're not going to charge the registered owner of the vehicle. If you find the VIN, you're not going to charge the person who owns the VIN, the vehicle based on the VIN. You could sit up on the vehicle and see if anybody comes by, but you're not in the vehicle at that point. You're not going to charge anybody. And then if you did, let's say you found a bunch of drugs in a case with somebody's name on it, and it says Lenny Memes, and it has a picture as well. Has a picture of Lenny Memes, and it says, "These are my drugs," and it's in a briefcase, and everything is signed, sealed, delivered. Then you're going to run into a Fourth Amendment issue with the courts. It wasn't a Fourth Amendment violation to get into the vehicle to determine whether or not it was stolen, but you did find evidence that a crime has been committed, and you did a search that I could see a judge saying, that wasn't a good search for this kind of thing. You were looking for the VIN and you turned it into a fishing expedition. I'm going to disallow this evidence, yada yada yada. So you've just lost what it is that you went into that vehicle to get. If your real purpose is to find contraband or to charge somebody with a crime, I would say go ahead and just tow the car, get a warrant to search the car later. You can do that. It kind of all depends on to what exactly your purpose is. I can also tell you that I've been in situations where I found a similar car. I've never had to force entry into a car, but if I find a stolen car parked in the wood line somewhere. And there's a couple of suitcases in the back of that car. I have to go through the suitcases to make sure there are any firearms, explosives, bombs, all that kind of stuff in there. And I find a couple of makeup cases full of needles. I find a whole bunch of like little packets of drugs, like little things like that. The only thing that I'm going to do in that case is I'm going to take all that contraband. I'm going to take it to the proper room for destruction. If that vehicle were locked and I believe that vehicle was stolen, and I can see a bunch of suitcases and stuff in that vehicle, I'm probably not going to pull out of energy into searching that vehicle, getting in to do those things, because then I'm going to have to create a lot of work for myself that isn't going to produce anything good. It's just going to be time consuming. I can get into that vehicle and I'm going to find a bunch of evidence that crime had occurred, but I'm just going to take that evidence, turn it in for destruction. It's not a profitable venture. It's not worth all the time that I'm going to spend on it. Now, depending on how big your small town is, if you get into a vehicle and you find all that, the drugs and all that other stuff, and you want to just take it for destruction, and you waste your entire shift on this one stolen car, but you weren't going to do anything anyway, have at it. But yeah, the short answer to your question is yes, it is a Fourth Amendment issue. Anytime you're breaking into or searching a piece of property, it's a Fourth Amendment issue. Doesn't mean that you're violating the Fourth Amendment or that you're breaking the law by doing so. But I would probably go the route personally of I would just have the vehicle towed as suspected stolen, or where I work, the city parks are closed at night, but we have private tow companies that patrol the parks and they tow the vehicles for us. If they hold that vehicle for a certain amount of time, there's civil law dictates what they can do with that vehicle. If they break into the car to find the VIN and then they find that it's stolen, they can later contact us, let us know that they've recovered a stolen car, and we can get it back to the owner. There's other things too involved with that, but I won't necessarily get into it. So I don't know. I hope I answered your question. If you're interested in what the rest of the people on the Poorly Made Police Memes podcast had to say about this particular question, it was at the very beginning of the episode. I think I can pull it up here. Right here. Season 2, episode 45. The podcast is entitled Am I the Asshole? And it had your regular cast of Lenny, had Silent Saul, the female, I know her name kind of, but I forget what he calls her on the podcast, and then his buddy he calls Tobias. So it was 3 police officers and a lawyer who's a police officer part-time, and then Lenny, who is a slob that runs a podcast out of his basement. So I would encourage everybody to go listen to that episode. I'm going to listen to it once I finish recording this and buttoning it up. I just thought that since my name came up, I would answer your question for you myself. So thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to you later.